Welcome to another edition of Timber and Truth, and today I want to talk to you about why you should be treating your spiritual development like a little baby zebra. Here's what I mean by that. When a baby zebra is born, it lies on the ground for a few minutes, and then the mother's going to come up quickly and start nudging. Hey, get up, get on your feet. And as the baby zebra stands up and wobbly knees, gets its legs under him and feels stable just standing around, it may come over and try to nurse, and the mother steps away, creates a little bit of distance, says, no, you need to get out there, run, jump, get your legs under you, get strong. Why is the mother doing this? Because the mother knows there are lions. And how much time does a baby zebra have when it's born into the world before it could potentially become a meal? The answer is not very much, right? This baby zebra needs to be prepared for the world that it was born into, where an ever-present danger is already lurking, waiting to take it for a meal. And it needs to be ready to run and jump at the moment of danger. We as Christians are born into this world physically, but also as we are spiritually reborn as Christians, we're born into this world where there is already a lion seeking whom he may devour. Right? In 1 Peter 5:8, it says, "Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour." So, as we look at our youth today, statistics are rough. We're talking about kids who grew up in the church, Christian family. Different statistics will show about 60 to 70% of those kids, by the time they go off to college, fall away from the faith and stop attending church regularly. That's a major problem. We're talking of the kids who grew up with this firm foundation of faith. Most of them are falling away by the time mom and dad stop waking them up and bringing them to church. We have a lot of new Christians that are growing up in a world where we have access to all of this information, and unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that's available online is not very biblical. So new Christians are being led in the wrong direction. We have what's very popular on YouTube is deconversions. You've got pastors and famous Christian musicians and all of these people who say, oh, I was a Christian my whole life, and now I have to make this YouTube video to tell you why Christianity's false and why I'm deconverting. And ironically, they become very evangelistic towards their deconversion, probably more evangelistic than they were at their conversion, but that's another video. So what we need to realize is that the lion is on the prowl. He's taking people down, taking down our youth. He's taking down new Christians. Even established Christians are getting taken down. How do we keep the lion from taking us down? We first need to be aware that the lion primarily wants to take you down through questions. Right from the Garden of Eden, Satan loves to ask provocative questions that just plant that little seed of doubt in your mind to say, is this really true? And just let that fester and grow and nag at you like a splinter in your mind until you just feel like, I can't believe in anything. Right? And so we need to be aware of the fact that these misleading questions are going to lead to false doctrines under charismatic false teachers, and you've got to make yourself studied. I love studying apologetics because it brought me back into my faith. That's a story I'd like to tell later of how I grew up in the church. I had a major crisis of faith where I didn't know if Christianity was true. And apologetics actually helped me find a systematic way to reason through understanding not just what I believe, but having confidence in why I believe it. I can tell you for confidently that there are good answers for the questions that you have. Whatever question is nagging in your mind, it's probably something that has been wrestled with for the last 2,000 years. You are not the first one to think of it, and there already exists good answers for those questions that you have. Your struggle is not something new, right? So trust that there are good answers, people who've gone before you and already wrestled with these things. So don't let your faith be shaken just because you have questions. Diligently try to find some answers for those things. That doesn't mean that the Bible is going to answer every question that you could possibly come up with, right? The Bible is a specific text. The Old Testament is following a lineage from Adam through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, all the way up to the Messiah. It has a very specific story that it's trying to tell. It's not trying to be a science book. It's not trying to be basically tell us everything that we could know about everything. I think about knowledge like a fire, a campfire. If the knowledge that you have is the fire, it's going to illuminate a small area of the unknown, right? And as that fire of knowledge begins to grow, the more you know, the larger the area grows of the unknown that you're exposed to. So essentially, if you don't know very much, you don't even know what you don't know. You're so uneducated on a subject, you wouldn't have even thought to ask these questions. And the more you learn about something, often it just leads to more and more questions. That's the product of human nature. We see that in our children. If you've ever asked a child, or if a child's ever asked you a question and you try to answer it and they go, but why? And then you try to answer that and they go, but why? And eventually you just reach the end of, I can't give you any more. That's all I've got, kid. And yet they're still always wondering why. I always think that if humans ever found out that we were like in some sort of tight enclosed structure, not a flat earther, but I'm going to say, let's use that as an example. If we lived in this dome, right? We lived in the thing where there's this impenetrable wall that we found out there's an edge to this earth. There would be no stopping the pursuit of what's on the other side of the wall, right? That would be the only question on people's mind is once we find out there is a wall, we have to know what's on the other side. So understand that that's human nature, is that we desire to find our limitations and then immediately be obsessed with trying to find out what's on the other side of our limitations. That's an unsolvable quest. You cannot reach solving every possible question that somebody could come up with, right? We're going to have to understand we have limitations because we are finite. God is infinite. His ways are higher than our ways. If God is someone all-powerful and capable of being worshipped, then he's not going to be the type of being that we can fully grasp or understand or explain to somebody else. There's going to be mysteries involved in it, and that's something to expect. But just because we can't comprehend everything about God doesn't mean we can't apprehend anything about God. He has revealed enough to us to be sufficient for us to have a solid, grounded faith, to have confidence to know that these things are actually true without answering every hypothetical question somebody could come up with. Okay, so that's questions. Secondly, we know that the lion is going to attack through the cares of the world. If he can't get you wrapped up in doubting your faith, he's probably just going to try to distract you and get you sucked up into the cares of the world, chasing the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, prideful pursuits, and the pride of life. We have to realize that this is a wartime. Ephesians 6 tells us that there's a spiritual war going on. Sorry, my notes are flipping up here. There's a spiritual war going on, and in wartime, you don't have the luxury of pursuing a life of comfort and pleasure. Sometimes, yes, there's going to be moments that are wonderful with your family and with your kids and amazing things that God blesses you with. Don't forget that this is a wartime. We're not supposed to be predominantly consumed with having a life of luxury and comfort and pleasure. We're on a mission here. This is a war. So in Hebrews 5, chapter 5, verses 12 through 14, Paul writes to the Hebrews and he says this: "For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you have need again for somebody to teach you the elementary principles of God, and you have come to need milk, not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is not accustomed to the world of righteousness, for he is an infant. But solid food is for the mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil." This is our culture today, as we have people who've been in the church for years or potentially even decades that are still spiritual infants, coming there to be consumers of whatever little bottle-fed sermon is going to be doled out that week from the preacher, the pastor, and they haven't developed into maturity to be onto solid food. Paul is saying, you guys should be teaching this stuff, and yet you're still asking questions about the basics. We're still stuck in Christianity 101 because you haven't taken the initiative in your faith to grow strong in maturity so that you can have, as he says at the end, your senses trained to discern good from evil. You need to develop the wisdom and that perception to read something or watch a YouTube video or hear a message and go, no, that doesn't sound right. Because I'm familiar. I may not be an expert. I don't have my PhD in theology and apologetics. I'm not a mission trained pastor, but I've read enough of my Bible to say that doesn't sound right. And I'm going to go back and read and check. Be discerning enough that you're not going to get pulled away into a world of false teachings. So we want to take our faith seriously so we have the spiritual maturity to not fall into the traps of the lion. But then we need to look around. Right? We need to actually, as soon as you have enough maturity to feel confident in the basics, then it's time to actually see who else that maybe is a little bit further behind in their spiritual development can I start pouring into? Can I get involved in the youth group? Can I start a men's ministry? Can I start a women's ministry? Can I help struggling marriages? Can I help people who are struggling financially to have more godly perspective within their finances? Who else can I pour into? Because we're not called to make converts, we're called to make disciples. If we're just called to make converts, we're like salesmen for Christ. And anybody who's ever worked in sales, which I have, knows that the mentality is you're very invested in getting the sale, but as soon as the paperwork is signed, boom, you're on to the next one. I got my commission. I'm done. Don't care anymore. This isn't sales, right? We're not making converts. We're making disciples. I think an appropriate word for a disciple is really more accurately thought of in English as an apprentice. So in the, let's say, medieval times, you would have a baker, a metal worker, you'd have a candlestick maker. I don't know what they did back then. You'd have a trade that you would do, a craft. And typically the father would take the son in with him and he would take him out and teach him how to be a blacksmith. They would take him and teach him how to be a baker or a leather worker. And the child would watch what they do, slowly learning and developing the skills. And it starts by watching, and then it starts by helping him do, and then it starts doing on their own. And then you send them off to replicate and do what you've taught them to do. That apprenticeship program is what Jesus calls us to be. When he says, come and be my disciple or make disciples, it's like make an apprentice, which is an involved process that you have to really get to know somebody on a personal level, understand the struggles in their lives, listen to them, teach them, encourage them, pray for them. This is what we're called to do. So find who you can be pouring into to disciple them in their spiritual growth and development, right? You don't have to be an expert to do this. You just have to be one step further ahead. And the last advice for the day is find a good herd. For zebras and for Christians, you stand a whole lot better chance of resisting getting taken advantage of by the lion if you're part of a good herd versus being off on your own. If you're off by yourself in the middle of the plain, you're easy pickings. You blend in with the strength of the herd. That's going to be the strength and the encouragement and the support that you need to resist the lion. So with that, I'm going to get out of here before we get any more snow on the roads. Have a blessed day and stay salty, my friends.